Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us today. So today's session here during the MEFA Institute is Financial Aid Basics for College Admissions Professionals. So we have a great panel today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves in a minute. My name is Stephanie Wells. I've been at MEFA for over 21 years, and I do lots of programs in the community, online, virtually, and in person now with families, college professionals, school counselors, you name it. Talking to students, whoever wants to talk about financial aid and paying for college, we're out there in the community. So I just went through little logistics for those of you who are still logging in. We are recording today's session and we will share that along with the PowerPoint slides. We do have everybody on mute. I do have the chat is open and the Q&A is open. So if you have questions as we're going, feel free to type those in the Q&A and we'll answer those. So a little bit about MEFA before we introduce our panelists. We are a nonprofit quasi-state authority. We've been around since 1982, based right in Boston. And I know we have lots of folks on the line who are from colleges all over the country, so welcome. We are a Massachusetts-based company, but we are a national lender. So now we work with colleges all over the country. No matter where the student lives or goes to school, we can definitely work with your school. So we are happy to be able to open up some of our professional development programs that are part of the MEFA Institute to colleges nationwide. So the purpose of today's discussion is for those of you on the line, admissions professionals, to give you the basics about financial aid and what you need to know before you hit the road. So when you're at college fairs or talking to students at high schools, we want you to know the basics. We want you to understand the questions that you should know about your college or institution. So our panel of experts is going to go through that. So what you should be saying to families, but also our panelists are going to talk about times where you might not want to answer the question. You might want to pass that off to financial aid. It might be a little too intricate, and there's different things involved where they might want you to just say, send them to us, and we'll talk to them about that. So we'll go through that as we go. So the way today's session is set up is we do have some content slides. So we'll go through those. Each of us has split up the presentation. And at the end of each little section, we have questions for discussion. So that's really going to be the meat and potatoes of today that I want everybody to benefit from, is really hearing these questions from our panelists and hearing their advice about what you need to know when you hit the road in the fall. So I just introduced myself, Stephanie Wells. Been at MEFA for a long time, Director of College Relations here, and I will let my colleague Kathy Anderson from Berklee introduce herself.
All right, thank you so much. My name is Kathy Anderson. I'm the Associate Vice President of Student Financial Services at Berklee College of Music, which we have 5 campuses, Berklee, including the Boston Conservatory, and an online division, campuses in New York and Valencia. I oversee aid and scholarships for all of those campuses. Been doing this for a long time, 30 years, and thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Kathy. Joyce, hello, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Joyce McLaughlin. I'm the Associate Dean of Enrollment and Director of Financial Aid here at Umass Lowell. I've been here for about 25 years. Umass Lowell serves about 21,000 students over the undergrad career level, as well as an online program. So happy to be here today.
Thanks, Joyce. Welcome, Bill. Thanks for joining us.
Hello, everyone. My name is Bill Smith. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Student Financial Assistance at Stonehill. I've been working in financial aid for, I guess, close now to 15 years. And before that, I started my career doing what you guys are all were doing. I was an admission counselor, or a failed admission counselor, for 2 years.
That's great. So you know both sides, which Joyce and Kathy also do, because they're out and about as well. Okay, so here's the webinar topics we're going to cover. So we're just going to jump right in, and I believe we have Joyce who's going to go first, and I'll run the slides for you, Joyce. So just let me know. We're going to start off with Joyce talking about the types and sources of financial aid.
Sure, sounds great. Thank you. So what is financial aid? Financial aid is simply money that helps students pay for school. There are 3 main types. You have your grants and scholarships, your federal work study, as well as federal student loans. So your grants and scholarships are free money. It's gift aid that students do not need to repay. The student employment, the work study, that is an opportunity that students are able to work on, typically on campus, but earn money to put towards their educational expenses. So it's a great way for them to help ease the cost of education, but also gain some work experience while they're in school. It is taxable income for the student, and they do need to earn it. However, when they're going to apply for aid in future years, that income comes off their total income. So it's nothing that will impact their financial aid eligibility in future years. And then federal student loans are offered to students at a low fixed interest rate, and they offer, a variety of repayment options for our students when they leave school. And the sources of financial aid. So when a student is applying for financial aid, they're applying for federal aid, state aid, and institutional aid. And then there's also opportunities for outside private aid sources for them. So at the federal level, the grants are typically geared towards students of lower income families. The work study awards will be geared towards your students who demonstrate financial need. And then our loans and tax incentives, those are available for students regardless of need. So if they have need or not need, they're still going to be considered for federal student loans and eligible for tax incentives on their federal tax return. At the state level, similar to the federal, the grants are geared towards our lower income families. Massachusetts offers a variety of scholarship and tuition waiver programs for all students that meet specific criteria. Our state schools are probably very familiar with the John and Abigail Adams, the tuition program, which is awarded to students based on their MCAS at the high school level. And it allows them a credit at a public school, and it is something that's renewable. So that's just an example of one of the non-need-based programs that are available to students. And then states also may have their own loan programs. Massachusetts has the Mass No Interest Loan, but not all students participate. So it's important to know whether or not your particular school does participate or not participate in that program. And then virtually every college and university has some type of need-based and or merit-based program that they're running. Some institutions run their loan programs as well. They'll have an institutional loan program. Umass Lowell does not do that, but I know some of the other schools do that. And then finally is our outside resources. So students are able to search and research for private scholarships. There's tons out there. There's a couple of links, the FastWeb and MEFA pathway on the slide there. A great resource for our students is the high school guidance counselor. They really can connect them to the local opportunities. So when we're counseling families and students on what other scholarships could I apply for, we definitely push them through the scholarship searches, but really try to enforce that relationship with the high school guidance counselor. And we always tell them not to pay for these searches. They're just scams. There's free resources and people out there that can help you with this.
Great. I'm also just going to add, Joyce, because I know some folks are from out-of-state schools. It would be in your best interest just to understand what programs your state offers through your state agency. Some states don't have funding for higher ed. Some have more than others. So every state's going to be a little bit different. So definitely check out the resources and just have a general familiarity about the programs in your state.
Excellent, thank you. Now, merit-based aid versus need-based aid. We'll start with merit-based aid. It's typically awarded on recognition of a student's academic achievements or athletic achievements or artistic achievements. Criteria differs from school to school. The process differs from school to school. Often they are renewable, but it's really important for you to know what your school offers when you're talking with families. So you know what you offer, you know if it's renewable or not renewable, if there's a separate application that the family needs to do it, a deadline, as well as the timing. When is the student going to know whether or not they receive this type of award? And then the other aid is the need-based aid that is awarded based on the financial aid application. So whether or not the student has need will really determine what they're eligible for in need-based aid. And students, full need students or even high need students, it's not uncommon for their needs to not be 100% met. So there's a lot of counseling that goes on in financial aid in terms of if there's a gap and what options they have for paying that gap. And, when a student's receiving their award letter, everything really should be on there. Any loans, work study, merit aid, need-based aid that the student is being offered so they can move forward and make their financial plan.
That's excellent, Joyce. We do have one quick question that I want to just mention here before we keep going. We have a question about how long do students have to use the John and Abigail Adams Scholarship? And the question also talks about other scholarships, which we'll get into in a minute, but if you could just answer the piece about the Adams Scholarship and how that works real quick.
So they typically come in, it's renewable for up to 4 years. It is applicable towards public institutions. So if they go to a private institution initially and then transfer in, there is guidelines that allows that student, if they performed well at the private institution, to also gain that Adams when they're transferring into the public and state schools.
That's excellent. And there is on the previous slide, I showed if you want more information on the state programs in Massachusetts, mass.edu/OSFA, you can find all the details about the Adams Scholarship and all the programs in Massachusetts there as well.
Excellent, thank you. So moving on to federal direct student loans, the government offers federal student loans. The student is the sole borrower. There is no credit check on these loans. It's a fixed interest rate of 4.99 this upcoming year. And there's a variety of repayment options for them when they leave school. The two types of loans that they offer is subsidized and unsubsidized, and both of them carry these same terms and conditions. The key difference between the two is that the subsidized loan is considered a need-based loan. So the government is paying that interest while the student is in school, whereas the unsubsidized loan is considered a non-need loan and the student is responsible for that interest. So when we're counseling students, if they're thinking of taking one or the other or taking a lower amount, we're definitely trying to, if they qualify, trying to counsel them to take the subsidized because it's just better terms and conditions. But on both loans, the principal, they're going into repayment after they leave school. And as you can see on the slide, the annual loan limits, it increases with each grade level. So freshmen, 5,500, and juniors and seniors go up to about 7,500. So the maximum a student would borrow if they were graduating in 4 years in federal student loans would be the 27,000 maximum. The other options for students is, again, if the state has loans and your school participates in those loans, that's an option, or the institutional. The federal government also offers a federal plus loan, and that's a parent loan. That is a little bit different because there is a credit check involved. It is in the parent's name, but there are deferment options for the parents to be paying that after they leave school. And then there's a bunch of lenders that do private loans. We always counsel our students to take advantage of the federal student loans first, because it's going to give them the best terms and conditions. And with the private loan, they typically, it's unlikely that the student alone would be able to qualify for the loan without a co-signer. So the private lenders, they lend to students and or the parent, but just so you know, like the students really are going to need a co-signer to secure a private loan.
That's for sure. We do get questions all the time. Well, what can the student take on their own with beyond the 5,500? And
Yes.
the answer is, unless they've established credit and they're working, there's not much. So let's go through some questions here. I'm going to skip to number 4 because we just answered that question. So what loans are available for students to take out on their own? Typically, it's just that federal direct student loan. But I'm going to turn it over to our panel. We can just go through these top three questions. Give some advice for our guests about aid at your school and what you need to know about it. And I'll just let you guys answer these in however format you want. Whoever wants to go first.
I don't mind going first. So I think when I look at these questions, it's definitely questions families are asking us at admission events. I think the admissions team and the financial aid team really need to know, what do we offer in merit-based scholarships? So it's going to be the #1 question that you're going to get from families. How do they apply at UMass Lowell? We don't have a separate application. It's just through the admissions application that they're reviewed. But if there is a separate application, being able to communicate that to families, deadlines, and also very important, when is the student going to be notified whether or not that they received the merit the merit scholarship. And the same thing on the need-based side, a general understanding of what forms are required, what are your deadlines, and when is the student going to find out from us?
Excellent. Thanks. Bill, do you want to go next?
Sure. Joyce hit the nail on the head. It's really, so this is the part where all these questions are going to be dependent upon your institution. And what I think the message that the three of us talked about with Stephanie before is really for having you understand what questions these families are going to ask of you, and how do you best direct them and get the answer to them. So it will be dependent on your institution. Need-based aid, that commonly asked question, is often a gray area. It's often one that will, not only will you be asked that question of how is it determined, we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit, but it's often one that admission counselors probably are limited in terms of how comfortable you are to talk about it. And your institution may actually tell you, we don't really want you to get into that. We may want you to pass that off to financial aid. But need-based aid is really dependent upon the forms that the institution requires, and then all the data points that are on those forms. And then the institutions are going to use that and determine basically your need allocation. We'll talk a little bit about that in a little bit. I can turn this over to Kathy, who might be able to give a little bit more perspective.
Sure. So we are a little bit of a different institution in that most of our scholarships, because we're at a School of Performing Arts, are given in the form of merit-based aid when a student auditions. Everybody has to audition here, and the audition is what drives our funding. So there's really no extra, we do all the federal aid as well, need-based aid, federal Department of Ed stuff. We also do some very limited institutional need-based aid that may be stacked up on top of the merit scholarship. Again, this isn't something that our admissions counselors are super well versed in how this all works here, and are very comfortable with providing this information to families. And we want to be as upfront as possible, as transparent as possible with them, so that the student who doesn't get any sort of scholarship assistance doesn't anticipate having a whole bunch of need-based aid, right? So yeah, we do merit-based more than need-based, and it's all done through the audition process.
Do any of you require students to apply for financial aid if they're getting a merit scholarship?
We do not.
No.
We do not.
We get that question from families, and we just tell them to check with the school. And we usually tell them that generally your admissions application, or if you're at a performing arts school, your audition is how the scholarships are based. There are obviously athletic scholarships and artistic, musical, things like that, but most merit-based aid nationwide is given out based on the student's overall admissions application. Okay. All right, great, thank you. And I think we're going to get into the application process, and I believe Kathy, you're up on this section, correct?
I am up. All right. Those of us who work in aid love forms. So we are going to talk about all the forms that we have to fill out to apply for federal and institutional financial aid. This is not a Berklee perspective. This is more of a, what happens, what families need to know when they're going through the college admissions and aid application process. And I do want to just state that what we're talking about really pertains mostly to to domestic students. We have a pretty large international population here at Berklee, and none of this is what we're talking about applies to them. So this is really for your US students. I think this first bullet is really very, very critical for a lot of, deadlines are so important. It's very cut and dry. You need to know when not only your admissions application is due, but what the financial aid deadline is for new students, and tell students that they should not wait until they hear from the admissions decision to apply for aid. They need to get both things done simultaneously. For early action and early decision, the good news is that the Fafsa and the Css Profile, if you're a school that requires that, those are now available in October. So really, really early in the admission cycle, with an eye toward getting students the information that they need to know as early as possible, so that they can make the best decision for them, not just academically, but financially. For regular admission, deadlines are typically, like, I've worked at schools where it's February 15th or March 1st, March 31st, depending on the institution, and they really should be in tandem. We try to line them up with, our financial aid deadline usually syncs up with the admission application deadline. So we ask for both things at the same time. Again, don't submit it late. That's probably the most important piece of advice if you're talking to a family that they can have is, it can cost them thousands of dollars if they miss the deadline and by even a day. The MEFA College Application Manager has a really nice tool to help you stay organized, on track with all of your deadlines, and the link is there for you to, if you want to show your families where they can put all of their information so that they don't miss any important deadlines.
Great, and I'll just add, we're probably not going to have time to do much demo of all the resources on the MEFA site, but you can use it as your own personal, thesaurus, or your own personal encyclopedia. You just go in our search bar, type in applications, and you'll find every article and blog and webinar and video and podcast that relate to that topic. So I'm just going to I'll leave it there and keep going, but I just want to mention that as well.
Okay, so the form that most people are familiar with, and that any college that gives out federal student aid is requiring, is the free application for federal student aid, or the Fafsa. It is required by any college that does any sort of federal institutional aid. So the loans that Joyce talked about, any sort of federal grants that may be available, those all go through the Fafsa. It becomes available October 1st of every year. So in October of 22, it'll be available for the 23-24 academic year. So it's very, it's a long window for families to apply. It's a really, really positive change. Students go in with their parents and they log in with their FSA ID, which is like their personal PIN number. It's what they'll actually keep this the entire time that they're using any sort of federal website for student aid. And the student and the parent each have to have their own. Many times we see that the parent wants to fill it out and be really helpful for the student, but they each need to have their own FSA ID. So this form requires, and I don't want to get into the weeds with this, but this form does require that the family use their tax return from basically 2 years ago. So incoming students for 22-23 used a 2020 federal tax return. So they'll be using 21 for this upcoming fall cycle. There's something called the IRS data retrieval tool, which makes it super easy. The family can just click a button and the data from the tax return can be transferred over to the Fafsa. And if they're able to use this tool, not everybody can, but if they're able to use this tool, it's hugely beneficial to them because that data is going to be accurate. And, if they can use it, not everybody can, but if they're able to, we strongly suggest that the families go through that so their information transfers over accurately. And I'm going to skip that deep dive thing, Steph, and let you talk about that, but it must be completed every year. And this is something that is different than admission. When I go on the road with my admission colleagues, they talk about the admission process and all of it. And I was like, yeah, well, you're going to see me in my forms 4 years in a row. So we'll do this once, but it's not one and done. It's something that gets repeated annually. And just so admissions colleagues know, we send reminders out to students. We're pretty aggressive about making sure that they don't forget to do their Fafsa every year.
Thanks, Kathy. And we have, like I said earlier, a webinar for everything. So especially in the fall, we're going to be doing webinars every week for families, free of charge. Everything we do at MEFA is free, and they can log on and get free information about how to fill out the Fafsa, how to fill out the profile, which we're going to talk about on the next slide. So whatever college you're in the country, you can refer families to MEFA.org, and they can find that on our events page. And I also want to put out a call as we're going through. If you have questions, just type those in the Q&A and we will review those as well.
Yeah. Actually, are we going to talk about PJ somewhere along the changes? Does that come up? I can't remember.
Yeah, I think we're going to talk about it probably in Bill's section. About how we do the awards. Yeah.
Okay, so the second form that your college may require is the Css Profile. It is a form that I think about 400 different institutions require across the country, and it's something that does a deeper dive into the family's finances. This is one we use with our international students as well. So it's cssprofile.org. We use it to help determine scholarship eligibility. We have a program for students who have been here at least one full year where they may be qualified for scholarships if they demonstrate financial need. We use the CSS profile for that. It does give us a very accurate picture of the family's financial circumstances, including assets that wouldn't be on a FAFSA. So FAFSAs don't look for house information, like if the family owns a home, and the CSS profile does ask for information that helps us really get a full view of the family's financial circumstances. Admissions colleagues maybe ask, why does your school require it and others don't? It's really to help schools hone in on who should get institutional dollars. That's how we use it. There is a fee for this one, unlike the FAFSA. It's a $25 fee for the first school and $16 for each additional institution. But there are fee waivers available from the College Board if the parent income is less than $100,000 or the family meets certain other circumstances like, free and reduced lunch and other federal benefits. So it is an automatic thing. As they're filling it out, the waiver would just come right into place. Again, this one becomes available October 21st for the following fall as well. So it's in sync with the FAFSA. This one also collects data about, often we work with families who are divorced, and on the FAFSA, the student would put information only about the parent with whom he or she lives with the most. On the CSS profile, to give us a full view of the entire set of resources available to the student, we do collect non-custodial parental information. So we have a full view of both parents. I worked at an institution that said, the parents may have divorced each other, but not the child. We expect that both will be able to contribute toward the student's education. And looks like there's a webinar for that too. And it is required, again, only by some colleges and universities. You can go to the College Board's website and get a full listing of the institutions that do require it. And it's helpful for admissions folks to know, especially in your pool of overlap schools, who would require it and who might, which institutions require it and which institutions do not. Okay. After you apply, this data, so the student fills out the information. Back in the old days, when I started in this business, students had to actually physically mail their documents to each institution. Now it's all received electronically. Usually it's a pretty fast turnaround time, 72 hours or so before the school gets the information. We receive it electronically. It gets uploaded right into a financial aid system, and we can start looking to see, what the student might be eligible to receive. The student gets a hard copy of the FAFSA in the mail. I do not believe they get anything on the profile. Bullet number 3, we've seen quite a bit of activity with this one, with special circumstances. And what that really means is, the year that you're applying for college, you're using tax information from 2 years ago. The assumption is from year to year to year, the family's income stays about the same. With COVID, that is no longer an accurate assumption. So for admissions folks, if you are talking to a family that says, I lost my job because of COVID in fall of 21, that should be your cue to say, you should talk to our financial aid office about what they might be able to do to help you with that. So that's called special circumstances. It's handled at the individual college level. So, if the student's applying to 10 schools, he or she would want to talk to 10 aid officers. There's something called federal verification, where colleges are required to verify, meaning document the information that the family submitted on their FAFSA is actually accurate. It does usually involve the family sending us their tax returns and some other documentation that we require. Sometimes it's verify your identity. There's a whole bunch of different reasons. We communicate directly with the student, but just know, I know that my admission colleagues, I sit in the admission suite. Our colleagues are like, what is this verification thing? I'm hearing from my students that they have to give you tax returns. What's that all about? It's legit. And we can't move forward until we have the documentation that's required. There's no aid package until we get what we need. And then once everything is received, we review the applications and then put together a financial aid award package for the students.
Excellent. Kathy, before we get into the other questions, I have a couple questions that came in that Bill's typing an answer. So one of the questions, Bill took care of that one, but the second one was the Social Security number requirements on the Fafsa. Can students who have a Social Security number apply even if the parent does not have an SSN?
I believe they're instructed to put in either all zeros or all nines. I can't recall but the short answer is yes.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Thank you, Bill, for answering that other question. Okay. All right. Let's go through some questions for our panel. And we created some of these based on the questions that we get all the time from families. So the first question everybody is going to need to know, as we've already talked about, what financial aid applications does your school require and when are they due? Not just for regular admissions, but early action, early decision 1 and 2, whatever it might be. You should definitely know those deadlines for admissions and financial aid, at the top of your head so that you can convey those to families. So I think that answers question number 1, but if anybody has anything to add to that, jump in. But so question number 2, I added this one in because we get questions all the time where, families, they might need financial aid, but they're concerned that if they apply for financial aid or, when they're filling out the profile or the admissions common app, say, I want to be considered for aid, that's going to lessen their likelihood of admittance because the school is going to think, oh, well, they need money. We're not going to admit them because, we don't have enough funds or whatever it might be. So I just want to throw that one out there to everybody. And if you could also just touch upon deadlines and how it might impact aid if they miss it. So I guess, Bill, if we want to start with you and we'll work our way over.
Sure. The deadline and whether or not you can apply after the deadline. At Stonehill, we have a variety of deadlines. Kathy kind of hinted at it. And what appears to be at Stonehill, we have a new admission deadline, I think, every year. It's like early action 2, regular decision 2, early decision. There's a whole bunch of them. And so for each one of them, there's a separate deadline. It is possible that aid could be restricted if they file late. However, it's generally always in the best interest of the family to still file if it's late, and then let the institutions make the determination as to what they will do with that late application. I would say that that's not like written in stone for every institution. That's probably good advice that you could give families if you're asking or on the road. With regard to number 2, Stephanie, that's a great question. It is, for the vast majority, again, I'm going to paint with a wide brush here, and Kathy, or Joyce, you can feel free to correct me here. I'm going to paint for the vast majority of schools across the country, it's probably not going to matter if you answer the question or you apply for aid and you are looking for admission, or would that reduce your likelihood? With that being said, there are institutions out there that have a limited budget, the aid budget, and they, based on their initiatives, meet 100% of need, and therefore can only take or accept a certain number of students that they can fund. And so it is possible that could be the situation for a number of institutions.
Great, thanks, Bill. And I'll turn it over to Kathy. And I will paint a wide brush as well, that my advice to families when they say something like this, I'll basically tell them, unless you can afford to pay in cash, you should apply for financial aid because you don't know what you're going to get unless you apply. And if you don't get financial aid, then you know whether you can afford it or not. But and typically, even with, maybe the financial aid need coming into play in the admissions, a lot of schools that do have those policies, it might be for, whether they take students off the wait list, or maybe the 10% of the admits, last 10%, they might be looking, with the last bits of their budget, whether they can enroll those students. So it doesn't always impact the whole admissions cohort, but I'll let Kathy go next.
Yep, no, I agree with what you both have said. I've been on a lot of different panels with schools from, a lot of different types of institutions, and their advice is if you need aid, apply for aid, because if you get in and then you go looking for aid afterwards, it won't happen. So if you think you need aid to attend that institution, you should apply. And, you know, in terms of missing schools' financial aid deadlines, you can absolutely still apply. Federal dollars are available all through the year. Loans don't run out, Pell Grants don't run out, other things do. In terms of what might be available for institutional aid, it depends on the school. So, you know, we don't necessarily run out of money, but there are schools that deal with that. You know, the kids who made it on time first, the applications who made it on time first, they get the aid. And if there's anything left over, they go to see how far they can stretch those dollars. So I would definitely suggest telling folks to meet the deadlines, to give themselves the best place in line, basically, to get assistance.
Great, thanks, Kath. Joyce, do you have anything to add to this?
I agree. Just reinforce and know your deadlines and don't miss them. But if you do, a late application is better than no application, especially if you need financial aid. You know, typically at the publics, we have priority deadlines to prioritize our institutional funds, but you know, there still might be funds there after the priority deadline. So you wouldn't want to miss out just by not submitting anything.
Great, excellent, thank you. And then feel free, folks, if you have any other questions, to type those in the Q&A and we will cover those. So I'm going to turn over to Bill. He's going to talk about how schools determine their financial aid, financial need for families.
Thanks. This is one that's going to vary from institution to institution. So I'm going to try to keep it as high level as possible to seek some commonalities of what would apply at all institutions. And so what do aid offices do? That's really what we're trying to answer here. What is it that we do when we respond to families? And so other than have a lot of forms, say no a lot, and hopefully maybe have a candy jar out in your office. I don't know, something like that. But the really what we're trying to get to is determining your financial need. And that's really what institutions do when they're trying to allocate their limited amount of resources. And so Joyce talked about all the different types of funding, and this is the formulas in which colleges use to then allocate those resources. So the first thing you need to determine is how much does it cost to attend? This is what your COA or cost of attendance would be. Your cost of attendance is made up of both billed costs and indirect or unbilled costs. So some examples of billed costs could be tuition, room and board fees, and then unbilled or non-billed costs could be the costs associated with getting to campus in the fall and the spring and going home. So transportation costs, other personal expenses that they may have. They may need a computer or book supplies. Those types of things are things that institutions primarily don't bill for, but are still made up of the cost of attendance to attend that institution. You can go to the next slide there. There we go. Then we take the expected family contribution. Now, the expected family contribution ultimately is the output of the aid applications that Kathy talked about. So an expected family contribution is well known from the Fafsa form in that it is a number that gets provided to families upon completion of the form. So when a family ultimately fills out that Fafsa form, they get back an output. And colleges and universities also get that output. And the key number on there is that expected family contribution. The premise of that expected family contribution actually is old. It's an old regulation that dates way back that actually in your time as in careers, you'll probably see a change in the coming years. There's talk that it might go back. It's probably going back to the student aid index, but we won't get into that too much today. For the purpose of an expected family contribution, think about it as the ability of the family and student to absorb cost over time. And so it's made up of all of the data elements that students use on the forms for application or application for financial aid. So what I mean by the forms, you could have an expected family contribution on the federal side or a federal EFC, and an institution could have an institutional EFC. And that institutional EFC could come from the profile. Ultimately, the concept there is determining the ability for that family to come up with a cost calculator for the institution to use. How much do we expect in that family to contribute? And then the difference is ultimately their financial need. Go ahead. There we go. So, whoop. There we go. Okay, so we take the cost of attendance, you subtract out the expected family contribution, and then you have the difference, the delta financial need. And so commonly in this industry, you'll get questions maybe at an aid table. Is it worth me filling out applications to determine financial aid? I think about it at a college fair. You may be saying, I don't know if I'm going to apply, or someone told me I'm not going to qualify, I'm not going to apply. The easiest way for them to kind of do this before we get into a net price calculator, which will come up, is actually to recommend to that family, our recommendation, or my recommendation is always, fill out the Fafsa form. And here's why. The Fafsa form is free, doesn't cost them anything. And two, they get the output. They get a calculated EFC. They then can do this simple math. So you could say to the family, should I really pursue need-based aid? And you could say, well, here are our costs to attend this institution. Even if you just use your direct costs, which are probably on some pamphlet on your aid tables that you get, or your admission tables. And then you subtract that EFC. And you can then tell the family that the family could use it as a guidepost, right? If their expected family contribution is higher than the cost of attendance, then they shouldn't expect a tremendous response from the institution with regards to need-based aid. If it's lower, then that difference, that need that the family has, is what students, ultimately what institutions are trying to provide students in the form of aid, all those things that Joyce talked about at the beginning to fill that need. Joyce also mentioned another key component there, is that for many families, they think the expected family contribution is the amount that they will pay. And it's not. It's actually has nothing to do really with that billed cost for that year. Again, it's the ability for the family to absorb costs over time. And so the delta is not always met by institutions. Quite frequently, there is a gap. And so the expectation from the family oftentimes is, I don't even know how I can pay for the expected family contribution, and the college is now asking me to pay more. And so it's really that balancing act to determine that institutions do by taking all of those resources and trying to spread them out over their application pool in a way that also meets those institutional demands. Those individual schools have different priorities. In any given year, those priorities could shift for enrollment. If that happens, you could see shifts in how the aid is allocated. The last tool that students and families can use is, I'll be honest, it's a little bit of a love-hate relationship with a net price calculator. All institutions that participate in federal funding are required to have on their website a net price calculator. And what that net price calculator does is it allows families to get a snapshot in time of a projection of a net cost to attend that institution. Some reasons why aid offices don't like them is not all net price calculators are created equal. That's one. Two, not all net price calculators are going to provide the family with their specific costs. It could be estimated, it could be bucketed like large amounts. So you could say a range of, it could cost you between 15 and 30 or 15 and 20. There's a variety of different ways in which net price calculators are useful. The other thing about net price calculators is it's based on the information that the family puts into the form. So if the family puts information that's not 100% accurate and is a wild guess, then if you talk to your aid offices, they're probably going to tell you, hey, I got an email from a family that we just recently admitted, and they said the net price calculator that they filled out a year ago has a different amount than what the aid package was. Well, that was because they grossly underestimated how much income they earned that year, right? There's usually a logical answer for that, but those are the types of questions that you could ultimately work with families on exploring using the net price calculator for your institution before they even need to talk to an aid office. However, have them talk to the aid office because they'll probably will give you a more robust answer for the families, and they'll walk away a little bit more confident with the answers that they received.
Net price calculator is my answer to the question of well, if I spend my savings on a new kitchen, will that affect my aid? Will that help me get more aid? Or, if I make 100,000 less, what will happen? And I just send them these calculators so they can put in the numbers and see, if having 5,000 less in their savings will really make a difference. So
Right.
it's a good resource for those types of questions.
It is. It allows families and students to do some high-level comparisons before they even apply. That's the positive, right? They could ultimately use the same data in 10 different institutions and ultimately come up with some ranges of aid. You as admission counselors could all do the same thing. On a personal level, I always wonder if our most used net price calculators or other institutions trying to figure out how we're awarding, but that's a conversation for another webinar.
Might be good to go on your own net price calculator and play around with it just to get some familiarity with it. So let's talk about some questions. So what is the total cost of attendance? That's obviously something you'll want to know and understand, knowing that most families don't pay the sticker price. I call the cost of attendance a sticker price. And it will probably be good to know what statistics your school wants to promote as far as what % of need is met, things like that. And then I'll just skip to number 4 and then I'll open the rest up for questions for the panel. But a question I get a lot is, well, if I make 150,000, am I going to get any aid? And, I'll let the panel answer this, but in general, that's what net price calculators and EFC calculators are for, so that they can get those answers themselves. You never want to answer any general broad question like that with specifics, because you really don't know what else is going on in their family. You really can't necessarily make those judgments. But I'll open this up to the panel to add to those, but also really to focus on, 2 and 3 scholarships and grants at your schools. What kind of things would it change, or grades, critical enrollment and majors, maybe not every specific at your school, but things that admissions officers should know when they're answering these types of questions. So whoever wants to go first, you guys can just jump in.
I can go first. I think my advice would be for the admissions team to, get this type of information from their financial aid team, because colleges do have different practices. So I know at Umass Lowell, typically if the family's income is staying steady and they're meeting all their deadlines, because we love our deadlines, typically their financial aid is going to stay the same, maybe increase a little bit if we have a tuition increase, but not all schools function that way. Some schools will award based on what they awarded the student coming in as a freshman. And even if tuition goes up, that award doesn't change. So it's really the practice at the school, I think, is important for the admissions team to know.
Great, thanks, Joyce. Kathy?
I'll just jump in and say, like, the answer to that is it depends, just like everything else in the world that financial aid does. And there's really no hard and fast answer to, if I make X more, than what is the outcome for Y, because there are so many variables, and even the aid packages will change from year to year. If there are more kids in school, or, there's a lot of variables that go into it other than just income.
The only thing I'll mention for food for thought for admission counselors to know in the back of your head, the federal formula, so the application that most students are going to fill out for FAFSA on the FAFSA form, that form is income heavy. It's income. The EFC is going to be a lot higher if you have a higher level of income compared to a lower level of assets. And so just think about it that way. The higher the earnings, the higher the expected family contribution. That does not necessarily hold true on the profile for a wide variety of reasons, but just keep that in mind when you're filling out the FAFSA form. It is very much income driven.
Great, and I think it's important just to really know, especially on that merit aid, because that a lot of that, families going to admissions offices, we'll talk about that on the next slide, to maybe negotiate their merit-based aid or whatever. It's good to know for your merit aid, if your school offers it, what are the different levels, amounts, what are you looking for? what could impact it if their GPA drops. Some schools have different levels, and higher the merit aid, the higher the GPA requirement. So it's just important to know what that is for your school. I know that when my niece was applying to colleges, I was at a college fair, I would just go to different tables and, I knew what her GPA was. I'm like, okay, for a student as this GPA, what could they potentially get if they were accepted? So it's good to have that general knowledge about merit, especially. Okay, great. So I'm going to cover a little bit of the next slide, and keeping an eye on the time, I want to try and make sure that we leave it open for questions and get this all in within an hour. But so I'm going to briefly go through how families pay the bill. So it's not really one size fits all like everything else. Most families are using a combination of resources to pay their bill. So their bill is what's going to be due after financial aid is applied to the bill. The bill itself is going to be just those billed expenses that Bill talked about, but we want to know the family to understand those unbilled expenses, that they have to come up with that as well. So 20,000, let's pretend the family's balance is 20,000. If they were to take a loan out with MEFA, MEFA offers, low interest loans, a $20,000 loan, if I'm doing just round numbers here, about $100 a month per 10,000 borrowed. So that's $200 a month. So first question I'm asking families when they talk about their bill is, how much can you afford per month? If this family said, I can afford $600 a month, I'd say, great, you're not going to borrow the full thing. Let's put some on a payment plan. If they said, I can afford $2,000 a month, I would say, great, let's put that all in the payment plan, which every school offers. It's an interest-free plan. $2,000 a month over 10 months, your $20,000 bill is paid. But every family is going to have different levels of what's going to be affordable per month. So we try to encourage them, assess what you have for savings, decide how you want to use that savings. Do grandma, grandpa, aunts, and uncles, have they saved? Are they going to help contribute? So in this example, students saved a little bit over the summer. Mom and dad maybe saved 16,000, so they decided to do 4,000 a year. So there we go, 5,000's off the bill. And then we have our $600 affordable monthly payment that this family is using. So that's a lot more than that minimum loan payment. So let's borrow less. Let's put 5,000 on the payment plan at $500 a month over 10 months. So right there with savings and payment plan, we've chopped our bill in half, still need to borrow, but borrowing 10,000 versus 20 at $100 a month. So there's our $600 affordable payment. And we have, most lenders have some sort of calculator. We have a great payment calculator on our website that shows for different amounts, you can plug it in, how much you're borrowing. What is the payment going to be for each repayment option? What's that total cost of the loan? All of that information that will be on a loan disclosure statement is really important for them to know versus just saying, oh, I owe 20,000, I'm just going to borrow 20,000. We really want to encourage them to do the work, to think about it. So not just for 1 year, it's not about getting through 1 year. We want to get through 4 years for most schools. So if they can afford the payment the first year, but it's stretching, how will they be able to do years 2, 3, and 4? So even though it's an annual process, we want them to think in terms of 4 years. Think of that debt, especially if they're borrowing, a MEFA loan or a loan through their local bank or credit union. I talk to lots of parents who say, oh, well, it's not my loan, I'm just co-signing. And I always have to remind them, anybody who co-signs a loan, it's your loan as well. It's on your credit. You're responsible for making sure those payments are made. So it really is important for them to think about that if they're co-signing for a student, expecting the student to pay it all back. Well, what is the major that they're going into? What are their employment rates, starting salary for those majors? That could affect how much they decide to borrow. And of course, we won't get into this too deep here, but they want to consider the rates and repayment timelines. How long do they have to pay it back, which ties into that affordable monthly payment. And if families are shopping around, within a 30-day window, let's say they apply for a MEFA loan and maybe a loan through a credit union for an education loan, it counts as one credit inquiry if it's within 30 days so that they can, do a little shopping to find what's going to work best for them. So Joyce mentioned earlier private scholarships. So this is above and beyond. Usually comes spring, senior year, Families are getting their financial aid offers, looking at bills and saying, okay, where can I get more free money? Where can I get more scholarships? And usually by May or June senior year, it might be too late to get those local scholarships because the deadline has passed or they've gotten as much as they can. So we do have websites on our website on MEFA.org. We have links to all these websites if they want to look into national scholarship searches. Any little bit helps, and we encourage parents to encourage the students to search for those scholarships. Even if it's a $500 scholarship, that's money for a couple bucks. So College Navigator and College Scorecard are great resources for families. I'm not going to show both, but I do want to click into College Scorecard real quick because this is one that I refer families to because I like the visuals here. And it's going to tell you, I encourage each of you to look up the Navigator and the Scorecard for your school and maybe even some of your competitors to see what your data is. So I like the Scorecard because it's very visual. It's kind of easy to read, easy to navigate. And Bridgewater State University, I put that in because that's where I did my undergraduate degree. And you can see basic information about each school. You can compare schools with this tool. So what is the graduation rate? How much is each student? What's the average cost? So a school may cost $80,000, but they might be meeting a lot of need. It's not going to cost $80,000 for most families. So what's the average cost? What are students earning when they get out of school? There's a lot more data here. One that I want to point out because I think it's important is, what is the debt that students are taking out at the school? What's the average debt? How many students are receiving aid? So there's a lot more data here. I'll let you play around and go in and look at that. And it might be good to use the comparison tool to look at your competitors' schools that you're working with and see, how your school stacks up. So I'm going to open up for questions and then we'll wrap it up. But let's see. So I mentioned your school's average student loan debt. That's something that a lot of schools put right on their website, but you can find that on the College Navigator. And that might be something that internally you'd want to have discussions about what pieces of data are you encouraged to talk about? And maybe what pieces of data are you not encouraged to talk about? But I'm going to turn it over to the panelists to talk about negotiating. So I think that's kind of what we're looking at question number one. And then you can also talk about appeals. So there's a difference between negotiating, which is asking a school for more money because another school gave you more. There's not really special circumstance, but then there's actual financial aid appeals where there is a special financial circumstance where families have a legitimate reason to, ask for more. So I'm going to let each of you talk about these two things, at your school or in generalities, however you see fit. And I'll let you guys decide who wants to go first. Okay, Kathy, I'm going to pick you.
Okay, that's the danger of having A as your last name. So we kind of lump appeals and what would be known as special circumstances kind of into the same bucket. And we do see it from both new and returning students. So the short answer is it is possible to ask for additional scholarship funding. A lot of it, depends on how our class is coming in, quite frankly. And that really drives a lot of the responses in terms of trying to get more funding. Some of the need-based aid that we offer in federal student aid will probably increase if we know that there's been something like we're working with a student right now who lost her father recently. And so we are making some adjustments to her aid package to make it more reflective of the family's current circumstances by taking her dad's information out. So we kind of all put that in the same bucket, but the way they're treated may be a little bit different depending on how, what the situation is. And I will say, after being in this business for 30-ish years, appeals have really taken off in the last, I guess, maybe 5 years. Maybe it's been a little bit longer than that. So I spend most of April in appeal committee meetings.
Excellent, thanks, Kathy. Joyce, do you want to go next?
Sure. It's pretty similar at my school as well. We coordinate with the admissions office. We have a contact person there that would take these type of inquiries and work with someone in my office to really determine, is this really a financial aid appeal because some circumstances have changed, or is it a family simply saying I got 20,000 there and only 5,000 from you guys or whatnot. So we look at them holistically, and it does depend upon how our class is shaping up and what time through the cycle those inquiries are coming in, and what our funding is looking like at that point. So it's not impossible, but it's also not guaranteed either.
Excellent, thank you. And Bill, do you want to touch on negotiating?
Everything that Kathy and Joyce has said is accurate. Appeals are part of it. Negotiating is a word we try to. I tell the staff here, you're not a used car salesman. We're not selling junkers in a lot here. There is an investment piece to their education, and at the same time, there are processes for appeals at Stonehill, and depending on the type of appeal, the process is different. So that's a piece that you could take away to your institution and ask some questions. If it's a need-based appeal, are there specific forms or documents that you need versus a merit appeal, or versus the family who just says, I want more money? What is the process for all of those? And just being a little bit comfortable navigating those responses.
That's great, thanks. And when folks mention that to me, I say, I wouldn't term it as far as negotiating or matching awards. Schools typically don't do that. But, if you're looking at two schools that cost about the same, they might be competitor schools and one gives you a lot more than the other, it's worth talking to, focusing on the school that the student really wants to attend. To be going through appeals with every school on their list isn't worth the effort, but to focus in on those schools where they're still really interested, just to see, why is there a big difference? And, sometimes schools throw in a couple more thousand and just, make the family feel good about it, but it really depends on the school. So I'm going to wrap it up, but I want to just mention wait list. Do you guys like aid for wait lists is whatever you can share there? Because I know that varies widely from school to school.
For us, it really depends when and if we go to the wait list, in terms of how far are we in the cycle and how many dollars are allocated at that point. I do have to say our admissions team is really good about communicating that to students coming off the wait list. If there is in anticipation that they're not going to get as much aid as, say, they were admitted 4 months ago, they're really good about setting that up front for the students so the families are well informed. But the short answer is it just depends on when in the cycle this is happening and what our funding is looking like at that point.
And we have a lot of advice on waitlist on our website as well. Lots of blogs about it. Kathy, Bill, do you guys have anything different to add about the waitlist?
No, it's pretty much the same, like waitlisted students are waitlisted because they may be lower in the the quality of the application pool. Typically, they don't see the same kind of aid as the students who get in. And so I would say, honestly, that aid is much lower for the waitlist applicants. But again, I think there's so many variables at play that one year that might not even be true. So it depends on the year.
Okay. All right, Bill, did you have anything to add there? Or are you good? Good. Okay. All right, so I'm going to wrap it up. I'm just keeping an eye on the questions. Bill's been typing them in to answer them. So thank you for that, Bill. So here is all of MIFA's social channels. So definitely connect with us. We're always putting information out there, especially for MIFA Institute information or for, colleagues. We're going to be putting a lot more on LinkedIn. But all of our videos are on YouTube, all of our webinars, a lot of great information. If you like podcasts, tune in. My colleague, Jonathan Hughes, I've been on his podcast a few times and it's really, fun to do. So definitely connect with us on social. And here's our phone number and email at MIFA if you need to get in touch with us. But again, there's lots of resources on our website for you to refer families to, or just, to ask, yourself, but definitely be working closely with your financial aid office to make sure everybody's coordinated and on the same page regarding messaging about your financial aid at your school. So I want to thank you, Bill, Joyce, and Kathy for joining us today. This is like crazy time for financial aid where bills are coming in, and just taking an hour out of your day is a huge ask. So I really appreciate it. And I want to thank everybody for joining us. Folks all over the country, it was great seeing you and hearing from you, and tune into the next one. Thank you, everybody, and have a great day. Thanks.